It's been a while since I've done a Frigate NVR video, and one of the reasons is because once I installed Frigate, it just basically runs. I don't have to do anything to it. I'll do an occasional tweak here and there on one of my camera settings for changes in environment or whatever, but other than that, it just runs. Well, version 13 beta is coming out, and I've been playing with the beta version. There are some changes that need to be made to your configuration file and some new features and updates. So I figured I'd go over those and get everyone ready for the version 13 when it actually gets officially released. Of course, you can run the beta at any time if you want to, and I've been doing that for a couple of weeks now with no significant issues. So let's jump into what's new, the features, the breaking changes, and then talk about my configuration, and then we'll talk about a little bit of the alerting that I use with my Frigate in VR. Okay, this video is not going to be a full install of Frigate on anything. You can use an add-on version, or you can use the Docker version, or whatever you prefer to run Frigate. Now, I do have a video that talks about how I installed Frigate with Docker on my Dell Optiplex, my little mini tiny computer, and it's been working fantastic. I've got a Coral TPU on it, so that helps a lot. But you can watch the video here. It's in my blog post, and I'll also link it in this video here. So let's just get into some of the stuff. Now, they have a full write-up on the GitHub page, and I've taken bits and pieces of that and highlighted them here so you can reference them quickly. So the first thing to talk about is Frigate Plus. Frigate Plus is a subscription-based service that you can use with Frigate in VR. Now, there's two tiers, it looks like. There's a free tier, so you can upload and annotate your clips for training purposes, and it's a Frigate integration. And then you can pay $50 a year roughly, and then you can upload, annotate, you get the integration, and then you help support this open source project, and then you get 12 model training credit. And it talks about all of this stuff here. So you can have models that are trained from scratch, specifically designed for the way Frigate actually does things. So it's better analysis of your object detection and your images with less resource usage. And then you can upload your own examples, and your model then gets tuned for your specific environment. And then it also trains to detect a more relevant set of objects for things or for the use of security cameras. So things like person, face, car, license plate. And then you get into your big delivery providers that you can use with this Frigate Plus model. So with the subscription, the paid subscription, you get 12 model training credits that you can use to train those models for your specific environment. So that stuff is now being rolled out in version 13 by invitation. You'll need this Frigate subscription or Frigate Plus subscription. And then you can download these subscriptions and put them in your Frigate configuration. It talks about how to do that. All of this, again, is on this GitHub releases page. In addition to all of that other stuff I just talked about, you can submit false positives to Frigate Plus for training the models. Again, you get 12 credits, training credits with the subscription. Now, before I go any farther, let me just mention that I am not Frigate is not sponsoring this. They haven't talked to me about making this video. I enjoy using Frigate in VR. I was a Blue Iris user for a long time. That's also great software, but it's resource intensive. It requires a Windows PC. And so I prefer to run something on a small form factor PC and not be tied to Windows, which is what I'm doing here with Frigate. And I've never really looked back since doing Frigate over Blue Iris. All right, so in addition to that, you've got support for SBC, small board computers, and other devices. If you're running version 12 of Frigate, which is the latest version, there's support for the Intel iGPUs and NVIDIA GPUs. With version 13 now coming out, there is a community-supported board framework. And this allows the community to add support for all kinds of different boards. Right now, there's a Jetson 4.6 and 5 device support, and also a lot of the Rockchip SoCs are supported. And this will just continue to increase, the number of supported devices will continue to increase as the community continues to build this out using this new this new framework for community-supported SOCs or SBCs and all that other stuff. Now, Frigate's bread and butter is object tracking and motion detection. And so there's a lot of updates in this section as well. In version 13, Frigate switched to using the Norfair model for object tracking, which allows for many improvements in how objects are identified and tracked. This is the Norfair model. It's a customizable, lightweight Python library for real-time multi-object tracking. You can add this detector with a few lines of code. So here's a bunch of features it talks about. And this is installed in the version 13 of Frigate. So that's what they're using now. Motion detection is more efficient, and it also recalibrates when there are big lighting changes, such as a change from dark or day to night mode. So the IR mode changes. If there's lightning in the area, if you have PTZ, and now Frigate supports PTZ, if there's big changes of movement in the framing or in the picture, it'll adjust to that using this more efficient model, and it will recalibrate that as well. The recording timeline is used to improve the detection accuracy. So what that means is there's an 8x8 grid created for all of the cameras, and this is updated daily, so there's always a fresh grid of expected regions so that the system can better do its object detection, and it's more accurate that way. It is also now possible to set the minimum amount of time an object needs to be in a zone before it's considered to actually be in the zone. The example of that is if you have kind of a driveway and then a street, and somebody puts a foot into your driveway section for a second or two while they're walking down the street. You don't necessarily want to say that person's in your zone or in a zone. You want it to just kind of ignore that. So what you can do with this is use this inertia setting and set it to some value that allows you to say, okay, I need somebody to be in a zone for X number of frames before it's actually going to trigger that zone and say somebody's in there. So that's helpful in situations like that, or you're in a busy area where you have lots of stuff passing by your zone, and every once in a while something pops through there that's brief, you can do that. All right, so those are some of the object tracking motion detection improvements. Recordings. One of the favorite things I like in this new version is the ability to export recordings either as a regular speed video or as time lapse. And you can do this based on user selectable time date ranges. So for example, going over to Frigate here, we can select a camera. Let's just say the driveway camera. I want to either do real time or time lapse. Let's say I want to do a time lapse video, and I want to make this video on, Sunday from, let's just say 12 p.m. to Sunday at 6 p.m. Let's do p.m. here, and then I will do, this is kind of confusing, 6 p.m. Oh, here we go. Scroll a little bit. 6:00 p.m. All right, so then I submit this, and what it's going to do is it's going to create this export, this time lapse, and then you'll see it pop over here in the export section. And if you already have a time lapse created and you are done with that, you can always download that. Playing it's easy as clicking it or downloading it. Actually, it doesn't actually play it. It'll download that time lapse for you. So then instead of having to stitch a bunch of files together in your whatever favorite media tool, which I have had to do in the past, if you remember, Frigate records in segments. And so you might have a 1 minute segment. So 60-minute segments, you got to take 60 videos or small files and put them together. The export makes it super simple. You get either a regular video for a time range. Boy, I'm really having a good time talking in this video today. Anyway, you can get it for a time range as a regular recording or a time lapse, which is what I just showed you there. So that's really nice. One of my favorite features, because sometimes something will happen and I'll want to see a time lapse of a specific time. And that makes it easy to do that, especially during storms. Those are always fun to watch a lightning storm come through or a windstorm. You can see stuff blowing in that time lapse. Okay, so there's that. Timeline data, metadata is now stored for specific moments during an event. So you can highlight when an object is detected, enters, or leaves a zone, or becomes stationary. So looking at my camera here, let's look at one event. This doesn't have any stationary stuff in here, but you'll notice across the top here, and it's hard to read, but you can see that it says here, person detected at whatever time that is. So then it shows you where that person is. And then you can see that they're in the actual camera area here. And then they entered the zone. So I have a zone here that's kind of off the side. So they entered the frame or entered the camera here, but entered the actual zone, which is a smaller subset of the camera picture here. They entered the zone at this time, and then they left the zone down here. So you can see when things happen. And if someone or something comes into this zone, you'll see other options here for whenever they are stationary, resume activity, or whatnot. So it's kind of nice to see that. It gives you a good indication if you're not sure what tripped the zone or tripped the event. You can click these up here and kind of get a timeline of where things happen. Now, one thing that you'll see here, which is impossible to read, let me see if I can get it bigger here. Disclaimer, this data comes from the detect feed, but is shown on the recordings. It is unlikely that the streams are perfectly in sync, so the bounding box and the footage will not line up perfectly. The annotation offset field can be used to adjust this. So in my configuration, which I'll show you later on, I'll show you what we're talking about with the annotation offset. You can see that actually my box is pretty lined up here. Typically that would not be true because where it puts this in the detect frame is not where it is in the main recording video. So the box may be here, or I may be here in the box over here or whatever. So setting the annotation offset fixes that. And you kind of have to play with that a little bit to make sure it's in the right spot. All right, so that is an awesome piece here. There are some efficiency improvements. Recordings maintainer now lives in a dedicated process. Recordings maintenance is now fully asynchronous. Database writes are now more efficient. And the recording config now can have a sync on startup enabled. And what this does is it checks for recordings in the database that are not on the disk and deletes them. So if you actually go through and delete a bunch of files on your disk to make space or whatever, if they don't exist on the disk and you run the sync on startup, it will take care of the database and clean the database up for you. Just means it'll take a few extra seconds or so to start up once it does this, especially if you've done a lot of work or have a huge database or huge files. Okay, so we talked about all of this export stuff and everything else. And actually, I don't know why export's in here twice. Let's just edit my log on the live video here. All right, so this is another cool feature. Audio event triggering is now supported using YAMNet. YAMNet has over 600 different sounds that Frigate can listen for. And this is sound classification on the YAMNet. It's a deep net that predicts 521 audio event classes from the audio set corpus it was trained on. And employs the MobileNet v1 depth-wise separable convolution architecture. Don't even ask me what that means. It just does this stuff. And you can actually use this in different programs. And what Frigate has done is included this now in version 13. If you're using Home Assistant and using the integration, this will not work for you unless you're running the 5.0 version of the integration, which is currently in beta. If you do want to use the sound, you'll need to install the beta version, and that will create different sensors, which means you can automate those. So if you hear a siren, if you hear a dog barking, if you hear screaming, any one of these 600 sounds, and assuming your camera has sound that's enabled and is being picked up by Frigate, of course, if you hear any of these things, you can automate against it. So I'm going to play with that. I haven't done it yet. I think it's going to be pretty cool to see what that can do. Manual events via the API. You can now create events manually in the API. So if you have a doorbell ring or a sensor is tripped, or if something happens, let's say you have a sensor in the backyard that trips and you want all your cameras to start firing off, you can do that through this main events API or manual events API. You can set the event length, the recording, save preferences, and much more. There's full documentation that is linked in my blog post and on the GitHub page for Frigate as well. So Frigate now supports PTZ cameras, and that can be done with basic auto tracking. And you can see an example of this on their website here. under PTZ control. Here's some auto tracking that is being done with Frigate. Same thing down here, just some testing that was done by the Frigate developers. So that's interesting to see how it tracks all of that. That'll be more fun to play with, or that'll be fun to play with and learn more about it. Told you I can't talk in this video. I don't know what's going on. I am drinking an energy drink, but that's about it. Black cherry vanilla. All right, breaking changes. Now, this is a major release, so we're going from 12 to 13, so it's always going to be some discussion around some of these breaking changes. So here are some of those highlights I'll talk about. Since the detection model has changed, the default values for motion detection have also changed. It's a different model, so you're going to want to start over from scratch. The recommendation is remove any specific values in your config and start tuning and tweaking them again. So if you have anything in your config file that deals with the motion detection settings, you'll want to start over on those and make sure that you reset them up. So it might be a big change for some of you that have really tweaked these models that you're already running. So just keep that in mind before you upgrade, that you will have to do some changes. If you have configured settings for stationary objects and have set that interval to 0, you're going to either need to delete it or increase the value, because stationary object validation is now required. You can't just set it to 0 and disable stationary objects. You have to set something in this value. More of that in the configuration. And there is a whole configuration site or documentation for the beta version. In fact, this is it right here. And you can talk about avoiding stationary objects, setting up stationary objects here. And it's all of this information is listed here. Note, there's no way to disable stationary object tracking with this value. So this interval that we're just talking about, you need to set that in there. If you have configured set, we just talked about that, super important. Changes to the database have been made. So they're rewriting the schema or redoing the schema. So if you are on version 12 or anything before version 13, you will need to make sure that you back up your database if you want to revert back to 12, because it will overwrite the database and change the schema. So make sure you back that up. It's simple as copying the location of your DB files to somewhere else safe so that it doesn't overwrite them. The default location, I say that on the Docker version. I don't know how the add-on version works where the database stuff is stored. The default location for the database has been moved. It is now in the config directory. This is because a lot of people are storing their files on a NAS, and moving this to the config directory speeds things up and prevents lagging writes to the database, which then causes other problems. So whenever you upgrade to version 13 and start up Frigate, it's going to go ahead and reconfigure things and move the database for you. However, if you're running Docker, you will need to reference the new location in your volumes section of your Docker Compose, or however you're pointing the database, or pointing your mounts to that particular directory. So in this case, for Docker, you're going to move it to host path config folder for that database rather than what it used to be before. All right, so very important that you deal with these database changes. Configuration for retain days needs to follow the record retain days format. And I'll show you that down here. Actually, I'll show you that now. If you go down here and you look at record, I can find it here. So record retain days. Used to be able to do record retain days would be on the same line. Now it has to follow the record and then retain and then days. So it's just essentially just another level on the configuration. Make sure you're doing the 3-level configuration here. I've already had that changed long ago in version 12, so I didn't have to do anything. But if you haven't changed it, this is now going to break if you don't change that. Again, Home Assistant 5.0 integration is required if you want to have all the features working. I was able to upgrade to 13 without upgrading my integration. It works fine, except for the sounds and some of the new features. So if you want everything to work that's now available in version 13 of Frigate, then you need to make sure you're on the beta version of 5. Or if you're watching this video later on and it's already released as a regular version, non-beta version, then just make sure you're on 5.0 or later. If you're using the Tensor RT, it now requires the NVIDIA driver version 530 or greater. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff about what's in Frigate. Let's talk about my config briefly. This video is getting really long, but we'll go through the config a little bit. I'll just talk about one camera that I have, and then you can look at all of this stuff here and update it, change it, copy it, and put it in your own config. Obviously, you need to use MQTT for some of this functionality to work. So I have my MQTT stuff already set up. That's beyond the scope of this video. You can look at any of my videos in the past that talk about MQTT and figure that out. You probably already know what you're doing if you're running Frigate already. And then we have the annotation offset, which is what I talked about. And I have in mind as a -800. They can be negative numbers. So you will have to experiment with this number to see how that lines up with the red boxes on your videos. Here's all my go-to RTC stream setup. I set up a stream for a main and a sub channel for every camera, and then I reference those down on the cameras. And this is my camera, driveway camera. This is my path, RTSP path, which then references that go to RTC stream. And then my input args are set for that particular camera and the fact that I'm using RTSP restreaming. This particular role is a detect, and that's why it's called driveway sub. If you look at driveway sub up here, that is this particular camera with channel 1 subtype 1. That's the URL for my particular cameras. And then the same thing for record. It's just the different camera for the full resolution stream. You don't want to run detect on a full resolution stream. That's CPU intensive and 99.9% of the time not necessary. And then of course you set your roles detect or record depending on what you're doing. And then for my audio, this is my recording setting for my audio. It's got to be AAC audio so that you can record that into Frigate. My detect is the width and height and frames per second of my detect stream, my substream. In this case, 640 by 480, it's running at 5 frames per second. That is set on the camera itself. And then Frigate just matches that here. I want to track persons, dogs, bicycles, cats, and cars. I want to enable snapshotting with a time step and a bounding box on the snapshots. I need to have the actual object be in any of these 4 zones in order for the snapshot to be taken. Otherwise, I don't care about it. It won't take a snapshot. Cropping is true. Height is 500. Retaining is 3 days for my snapshots. And then I define all my zones. This is probably out of order, but that's fine. I define all my zones here with the coordinates. If you've used Frigate at all, you know how you can define these zones. I have a lot of videos on that. And because this video is super long, I'm not going to go into how you do that here. But here's all my zones. You can set an inertia. This is, again, is that an inertia telling it how many frames something needs to be in a zone for it to be considered part of that zone. Commented out here, but essentially, if you want it to be immediate, it's 1 frame. And then for this right side, I only want to track person, dog, cat, and bicycle. On the left side, I added a car because I'm doing some specific automation on that left side of the driveway to turn on an ultrasonic sensor. So all the zones are set up here, same thing for every other zone. And then my motion mask, I set a little mask to motion or mask out my clock on my camera. I don't need to see that. If you have a clock running on your camera as part of the camera stream from the camera, mask it out, save some CPU because every time that second ticks on that clock, it has to detect that and see if that's an object it wants to deal with. So make sure you turn that off. Recording is enabled, of course. I keep it for 3 days. That means that it records constantly. So I have a 24/7 recording on this particular camera for 3 days worth of retention. And then I keep 3 days of active objects in these particular zones. And then I have a pre-capture and a post-capture of 3 seconds and 10 seconds respectively. Okay, so that's one camera. You can read through all of the settings on how all of this runs. There is a full configuration file reference. It tells you everything you could possibly want to know about how you would set up Frigate here. Feel free to take a look at my config and apply it and test it as necessary. Only other things I have on here are the detector is an Edge TPU USB device. And then I have disabled RTMP. I don't use it because go to RTC works for me in that case. And then I enable Bird's Eye and I turn on restreaming in Bird's Eye. And that's simply just to be able to continuously stream the Bird's Eye stream on some of my tablets and use the Frigate card on my tablets. You can you can disable this and set it to false. Just keep in mind if you restream, it does use a little bit more CPU. So if you have CPU issues already, don't turn on Bird's Eye's restreaming. Just leave it off. All right, so quickly, again, this is a long video. Let's talk about alerts. This is one of the most useful features I find in Home Assistant. With the latest version of Home Assistant, many of the automations can be done via the UI, but I'm going to show you the YAML. I used a non-blueprint version. And of course, you would go into your Home Assistant instance, and then you basically would create a new automation here, blank automation, or new automation, and put this stuff into it. So if we look at this particular automation here, again, you can do a lot of this in the UI, but I do this in YAML. It's a lot easier for me, and then I just copy it. So I can go over this real briefly and what it's doing, and then if you have questions, you can ask those to me on Discord or somewhere where I can actually get technical on the display. YouTube comments are great, but it's hard to answer technical questions there when I have to do examples. So essentially what we're doing here is this is a Frigate driveway with image. That's my title I gave it. It's looking for MQTT events, and that's why you need MQTT enabled so that it can pick up these events. This is in Home Assistant, so Home Assistant and Frigate need to be talking to the same MQTT broker. It's looking for any Frigate events with the payload of the driveway. And then there's some variables I set. So I set before and after. The way the MQTT works from Frigate, or events work, is there is a before event and there is an after event. And so you use both of these to determine how you're going to make things operate. And then the camera name, the ID, the label, score, a bunch of other stuff here. So first thing I do is I check to make sure that I haven't triggered this in the cooldown period. And down here at the bottom, I set a 90-second cooldown. That means is I will not get another alert within 90 seconds. You don't want to keep firing away at alerts if you have a busy area or a busy zone, because it's just going to go crazy all the time. So I give it at least 90 seconds for this particular camera. And you can set that whatever value you want, and you can actually change it based on the camera that you are, or the camera area that you're doing. So that has to happen first. If that's okay and it's not in the cooldown period, then we go in here and we check and make sure that the payload type is new. So that would be a new event. We check to make sure that the entered zone's length is 0, which means it hasn't already had something in that zone. We come over here and we check to make sure. So these are two OR values. So it's either these two things, or the length of zone is greater, entered zones is greater than 0. So this is a before zones. That has to be 0. That means that it's a new event and there's not been in another zone, the particular ID of this event. And then it also checks to see if the after zone is greater than 0. All these kind of have to be satisfied. And then it has to make sure that there is one of these zones, it's in one of these zones. So either the driveway left side, driveway right side, or both, because the length has to be greater than 0. So the length of this list, this driveway left side and right side, is a list. And it has to be in the after zone. So the variable after zone's up here. It has to be there. And then if it's there and it's greater than, or it'll be greater than 0, then it says, okay, this is satisfied. And in this particular one, I don't want to see a trigger if there's a car in there, because I do something different with the car stuff. So if all of these things are actually met, these conditions are met the way we asked for them, then it's going to come down here and it's going to notify my phone through the Home Assistant app, tell me there's driveway motion. It's going to send me a picture of the thumbnail or the snapshot that it got from that event. And it's also going to give me an actionable URL. So I can click on the link in there and it will send me to the MP4 file that was generated from this event. And all that's done here, couple other things it does with Android is I give it a channel name. That way I can set a specific sound in the Android application for the sound, and the priority high TTL0, which means that it will send it to me regardless of the sleep status of the phone. That's not the right way to say it. It gives it a high priority, which means it bypasses some of that battery saving garbage that prevents stuff from being sent through. I also send it to my computer through the HAS agent. The computer name is Superman. Same thing. In this case, I just send it a thumbnail, and I get a little pop up in the standard Windows notification area that it has done something. And then this base URL and this action URL are set down here in this blurred out section. And what that means is that I have a base URL, which is where it gets the picture from. And I have an action URL, which is where it gets the clip from. And the reason these are different is it sends me this image here. And then if I want to actually play it back, it goes to the API events section and goes through that MP4, or goes to that MP4 based on the ID. So that's basically how that works. There's also another automation that I do here that talks about, or that turns on my Atom Matrix light and the transducer, so that when the car goes in the garage, you can determine if you're close enough in or far enough in. I have a video on that, also referenced in the blog here, that talks about how I set that up. All it does is turns on this this switch garage Atom Matrix for 2 minutes and then turns it back off again. Don't need that thing running 24/7. I don't know how long those transducers last, or that little Atom Matrix board. I don't want to burn it out. So I just turn it on for 2 minutes. That's enough time to get it in the garage, park the car, and then it turns off again. So same thing here. Automation is all set up based on those zones, and anything else, any of these conditions have to be met before it'll fire that off. I also get a notification that there's a car in the garage. So all those things fire off. All right, that is a quick rundown of Frigate 13 beta and some of the new stuff. And by quick, I mean, it looks like this is going to be another one of my long videos. If you're still here at the end, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting what I do and being a part of my Mostlychris community, where I tell you about things that you may or may not want to know about. And with that, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you're not, just push it. It's quick. It helps a lot of algorithmical baloney nonsense, but it makes the videos get out there so that I can make more videos. We will see you on the next video.